Welcome back. This is the
Thanks.
Awkward Interviews. I'm really glad to have my guest today, Alan Kessler. He's an attorney in Portland who focuses on cases involving public records, intellectual property, and civil disputes. He's also passionate about government transparency, housing, and active transportation, as he words it. I know him, as a vocal critic of police brutality and anti-protest activities of police in Portland. I know him as one of the more thoughtful and vocal, at least behind the scenes with me, critics of the district attorney in Portland, Mike Schmidt. I interviewed Mike. Actually, it was the first interview I did for this series, and the results were really interesting. He and I both ended up receiving death threats from the far right. We were written about extensively in a number of publications. And so at the time, I was excited about what Mike ran on and, what he was hoping to achieve in this position of power. And he won by a landslide. So it looked like a mandate, so to speak. Since then, there's been some real highs and maybe some lows in terms of Mike's choices, Mike's priorities. I understand that in a position like that, it's hard for those of us on the outside to see what he's up against, what he has to do versus what he has to ask other members of the office to do. But I've had some far left activists who've been in unfortunate positions where they've been criminalized, arrested, and are looking at significant time, who have not necessarily been saved by Mike. But then I've seen him do a couple really important things, like making sure that outside attorneys try cases against police for killing citizens. So I want to talk to this guy here today about his time in Portland in the early 2000s and then since 2012, what he's seen changes wise, what the Proud Boys are up to, what the left is up to, what the cops are up to, and then what it's like to be an attorney and what, in this city and what he's focusing on, what his priorities are. So Alan, thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. So let's start out with, I guess, you've been in Portland this time around since 2012, I think. It's been 9 years. What has changed in these 9 years? What stands out to you the most about current day Portland, and how might this compare to the first time you were in the city before you went away to college?
Portland got cool right around the time I was coming back. And that became a big problem. The whole West Coast is having trouble, but that became a problem for housing affordability. We were a city that experienced a whole lot of white flight, which meant that there was a sort of sweet spot in the mid-century when these beautiful bungalows and four squares and old, early to mid 20th century homes that were originally built for wealthy people were quite inexpensive to rent. So you'd have artist communes, and you'd have 8 college kids living in a 4 square and paying a couple $100 a month in rent. And there was a feeling that was kind of starting to wane at 2012 that you didn't have to work very hard. You didn't really have to be part of a corporate machine. You could, go be a barista with a PhD for a few hours a week and then sort of like, do your art or your work or your scholarship or whatever on the side. So it was, at least for a certain group of first wave white gentrifiers, a really nice spot to be. And there's a lot of pain in the city that comes with that sort of, historical anomaly of this quite nice infrastructure being available for not very much money going away. and becoming, basically a regression to the mean. At the same time, we have kept in place all of our racist zoning laws. Oregon is the most racist state in the West, definitely, and maybe the country. It's sort of incredible, our history of white supremacy here. And we were very effective at keeping property segregated and mostly keeping people of color completely out of the state in the 19th century and 20th century.
And then there's also, of course, this, this law that is only still a law in Oregon that Still in Prison is working on, right? Where there are hundreds of people in Oregon prisons to this day based on a law that has been proved, has been considered or labeled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, that allows people to be sentenced, convicted, incarcerated with a non-unanimous jury. And apparently the KKK is the group that pushed for this law because it was used against Black people.
Yeah, it was important to the KKK that if there was a Black person on the jury, that wouldn't mean an acquittal.
Right.
You could count on the 11 other racists to put somebody away.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly frustrating right now because our Attorney General has the power to reopen all of those cases, to retry all of those cases. That's what's been done elsewhere.
Right.
And ours won't. There's still a deep-seated racism in our government here. And that, that spills up to the housing policy.
Is that true in Portland specifically, or is it less so in Portland than throughout the rest of the state, or is it just pretty much the same across?
I mean, I think that the power structure, it's just been steeped. The power structure is steeped in racism.
Yeah. And aren't
Oregon
aren't 7 districts that are red looking to secede and become part of Idaho?
Yeah. It's some in Northern California and Southern Oregon and maybe some in Washington, like they want to, create a great racist state. I mean, the Cascadia, the pretty 3-color tree flag, also has some roots in that same sort of, separatist white supremacy. Although I think there are also people who, have sort of adopted that same, also think of themselves as like Cascadian separatists who are not necessarily interested in the white supremacy aspect. The Oregon is a political. Nate Silver, as much as I have contempt for him, did a chart on the polarization of different states, and Oregon was the most polarized. Our red counties are the reddest, and our blue districts are the bluest.
Yeah, because up until recently, I just saw it as this and I've been, obviously, maybe not obviously, but I've been to Portland. I loved Portland, and I love the people of Portland, and I know so many people in Portland, and I saw it as this like kind of woodsy, urban, leftist haven that just happened to also have an obscene amount of ridiculous Proud Boys and a lot of Andy Knows attention. But it sounds like this is way more deep-rooted. It obviously impacts policing, but it also impacts housing, and it runs deep. So like, how else is this kind of playing out today in the Portland of today?
So we've had some of the most attended protests since the murder of George Floyd in the country, and some of the most violent response, both originally from the local police force, and then with the assistance of Trump's Gestapo, and now with occasionally with the assistance of Biden's. We've had just brutal attempts to repress speech, repress protest in the city.
Have the protests slowed down at all?
Yeah, I think that they have. There's some fracture. It takes a toll. There were a lot of fresh new activists who were on the scene in 2020, and the police beat the living shit out of them and poisoned them and arrested them, and looked the other way when Proud Boys from here and from Washington State did the same thing, had their parades, beat people, sprayed them with mace, in some cases murdered them. There's been so much violence, and it's been so much pressure that I think things have waned. There still is a pretty active protest scene, and the protests continue. But they were sustained for well over 100 nights in 2020, and it was
that was incredible. It really was a rallying point for the whole country, and it seems like, whether it's just a few or not, like it does seem like it hasn't stopped. But I think it's an interesting point that when I spoke with Gregory McKelvey, obviously also a Portlander, he mentioned that, like, he consciously did not take a kind of leadership role this time, because he had done that in the past, and there were this whole new crop of activists that you just mentioned. And to hear that, like, less than a year later, they're either injured, in the midst of trials, or in jail, or just so beaten down emotionally and fearful, that the kind of their strength has waned, is sad. And it kind of brings me to a point that I make a lot, and that's the importance of having clear demands, like real organization. To me, there's definite value in striking fear in leadership, when the leadership is problematic and needs to change. And that is achieved just by being out there. The more people, the better. The more ruthless in response to police violence, because let's be clear, the cops are the ones who start the violence. But how unwilling they are to just back away or run from the tear gas. Even destroying property can all be advantageous, in the sense that it it strikes that fear to the point where leadership maybe feel forced to listen to those who they think are not doing that, almost. Like, if you can promise me that those people will stop, I'll let you in on this city council meeting, and we'll talk about what you want to see done. Did you get a sense that there was structure to this protest movement? I know there have been attempts at defunding across the country, obviously. There was some success in Seattle. I don't think much has been done in Portland. And certainly the cops have not stopped their oppressive response to protests. So do you know anything about meetings with the city council, meetings with the mayor, who we call Tear Gas Ted, about making fundamental changes?
I mean, I'll push back on your the implication that there's not a clear demand. We had.
No, I wasn't saying there wasn't. I'm asking you if there was.
Yeah. And we had a budget hearing in 2020 where 63,000 people wrote in. Wow. I've never heard of that kind of response to a city council budget meeting, and 740 something people testified live, almost to the person. This was September 2020. It was the budget cycle last year. It was right before the election. It was September, October, right before the election. The vote happened right after the election. It was sort of the crux of things. The overwhelming demand that, almost to the person who testified, was defund the police by 50 million this year and 50 million each year until they're gone. That was demand, and people came up over and over and demanded that, wrote that in.
Yep.
That was very clear.
What
The
was the
protesters in the
response?
street were saying the same thing.
Okay.
Abolish the police or defund the police.
Yep. And defund to abolish, and that's the right approach, not just take the money away. I'm assuming there was also some thought into where the money would be reallocated, but it was defund down to zero, which is what I want to see. And how did they respond to those demands?
So one of the candidates lied and said that he was on board and used that to win the election. Oh, it was, yeah, very frustrating.
Yeah.
Ted, before the election, dithered. And then after the election, after the right-wingers, the relative right-wingers won election to council, Ted had his majority, and he took just a hard tack to the right and has become fascist, become Trumpian in his speech and in his policies. You know, it's just, we need more violence to cure this. We cannot tolerate property damage. We must suppress this. I need to talk to, I thought I was dealing with adults, but apparently the people of Portland are children and they just can't read. It's yeah, paternalistic and gross.
Wow. And this is so disheartening because it tells us again how critically important elections are. And we're not talking about national elections. We're talking about local elections, down ballot elections. And people like me have very little faith in elected officials because they've proven to us time and time again that even what they say on their websites and they say in their debates and doesn't happen once they're put into power. But even with the massive protest movement in Portland, it was almost like a backlash, it sounds like, where, you know, far right people, or I guess the people on the right, were elected. And now can any change be forced? You know, like, how can we change the minds of people like this? You know, that's,
We can't change their minds because it's profit motivated.
sure.
Ted is a heir of a timber fortune. His ancestors stole native land, cut the lumber, made an obscene amount of money, and he lives on that largesse. So he's above our petty problems. He lives in a different sphere, and the people he talked to live in that sphere with him, and that's who he cares about.
Yeah.
He learned enough of the words of equity, and he was, you know, he violated campaign finance law all the way through. I had worked with some others to basically defund his campaign. He was broke in August, and then the rich business interests rallied and made him a super PAC that sent a whole bunch of misogynist mailers to beat the candidate who would have just been fantastic. Just narrowly, yeah, Sarah Honoran. Yeah. Anyway, the one person who could still do something is the guy we were talking about earlier, Mike Schmidt. Like, he's a, and so he was,
Mike defund the police, but Mike can certainly change what we criminalize, what police respond to, and what prosecutors try to send people away for.
Oh, it's more than that. The police are committing crimes. That's the problem. The police commit crimes every night.
Yes,
I've documented them. People have documented them. I've sent them to the DA in forms of public records appeals. The DA's, a deputy district attorney has agreed with me in some cases that, you know, not that he committed a crime, but that there's an intense public interest in having their disciplinary records, which is, you know, unprecedented. A federal judge has, you know, said that a few officers in particular have committed crimes. Mike could prosecute them. Mike could use the power of his office to find these out-of-town agitators who are part of the Portland police gang and prosecute them into oblivion. They're all complicit.
tell me what you mean, just for the listeners, out of town agitators. What do you mean by
Uh, I haven't seen new numbers in a few years, but as of 2016, 2017, it was, oh, I don't remember the numbers either, but it was maybe less than 20% of the force lived in city limits. Vast majority of our officers live in the suburbs, live in Washington State, commute a long way in to come and beat and gas us, and then take their fat paychecks home out to the burbs and spend their money on nice schools for their kids.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a problem nationwide. And it's what led to people thinking up the idea of community policing. At least we should police ourselves, or at least the officers who are policing us are among us, which would be better. Still not a solution, because policing unto itself is violent in nature, and it's punitive in nature. But certainly having someone earning, we learn, there are cops in this country making $700,000 a year, coming from another place, to earn that money, and then going back and paying the taxes in that other place so they can have the good schools. It that unto itself should be criminal. And then on top of it, the crimes they're committing on the job. And there have been cases, as I mentioned in the intro, of not just beating, not just tear gassing, not just targeting, racially profiling, trumping up charges, but actual murder. Cops in Portland have killed innocent people. Those trials, as far as I know, are still ongoing. Since it sounds like, Mike has to be aware, he runs this office, like, why is he not? I mean, he said when he decided to have outside attorneys try the cops who killed people recently, that, like, the reason, he said, is because DAs and cops work together hand in hand every day. That was a good reason to have someone who might be less biased manage those processes, but it also might have been the answer to why he's not holding them accountable in the city.
When Larry Krasner took office in Philly, the next day, there was a long line of SAT attorneys carrying bankers' boxes out of the prosecutor's office. He handpicked the worst of the worst. He'd been a defender for a long time. He knew who they were. And then he came in with a memo that said, I'm in charge. This is how you're going to run cases. You're not going to prosecute low-level shit. You're going to put on the record the cost of incarcerating each person you want to incarcerate, and explain to the people on the record why that's worth it. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful memo. And the worst prosecutors, the ones that he didn't fire, quit.
Right.
He had a huge exodus. And then that left him a whole lot of budget to hire a whole lot of good people to do the work that he wanted to do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that Mike fired almost anybody. I haven't heard of him firing anybody, which is bananas, which is just, I can't understand the logic there, because cops and DAs work together hand in hand every day and lie together and are corrupt together and commit crimes together and are both basically above the law. They can't, for the most part, be prosecuted or sued in civil court. They needed to go, and I don't know why they're still there.
Yeah, because as Mike said, as he was, running for this position, and as he said since, the people he took over from, the former heads of this department, were anything but progressive. And so if the people who worked in that department for that person, or those people, the past DAs, were trained by them, were following their orders, they would have to really quickly fall in line and change their mindsets if they were to stay and do what Mike said he was going to do, which, is unlikely.
Yeah.
So, are there, have you seen any signs, like, are there things that Mike has done or will, says he will do or is working on that gives you hope? I mean, and does he still, is he still better than what the alternative would have been?
I'm not sure that he's better than the alternative. If he doesn't do more, then he'll have wasted a rare opportunity to get a reformer into that office. And then we'll just get more of the same shit. And if he doesn't fire the people who have the institutional memory, then he's preserving the institution and making it immune to another attack from the left. So I think in that sense, if he doesn't do better, it would have been better for Underhill to have picked his replacement than to have Mike there.
Why do you say that? Because
because like, it would have there would have been another opportunity for another reformer to pop up, or if he hadn't been on the ballot, there might have been another. I am aware of some other people who I would like to have seen run. I think had pressure to run. But Mike convinced me. He convinced a lot of people that he was that guy who's going to be the Larry Krasner for Portland. And I mean, I voted for him. I rallied for him. I agitated for him. I was really excited.
Yeah.
The thing that he's done, the one thing that, you and I discussed a little bit earlier that he kicked a case to the state attorney. I still think that's a cop. The one thing he did that impressed me was he sent a prosecution of a cop to a defense attorney.
Yeah.
That's somebody who knows criminal law.
Yeah.
And is not going to be friendly to the cops, is going to be the zealous advocate for conviction that you need when you're prosecuting somebody in this god-awful carceral system, right? Like if we're going to follow those rules, and I think if we're going to follow those rules, we need to follow for everybody, then we need zealous advocates when we're prosecuting the police.
Yes.
And if it got fair, it probably would be got gone, right? Like if everybody was subject to this god-awful brutal system, nobody would want it anymore. The problem is we disenfranchise the people we convict, and we have historically targeted marginalized communities who don't have as powerful a voice. And it's just fine for me, I don't care. What he should do, what he could still do today, is pick all of the worst offenders, and I'm sure the defense bar could come up with a list, and fire them, and have some funds, and he should appoint people who are brave enough to prosecute the cops to be special prosecutors. He could deputize as prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, and give them discretion to go find crimes, hire private investigators, investigate the crimes, and prosecute them. I proposed this to him right after he was elected. I had a call with some other people, and he kind of chuckled, and his feeling was like, well, he doesn't have investigatory resources, but he's an elected official who has a huge budget and has a mandate to enforce the laws of the state of Oregon on behalf of the people of Portland, or on behalf of the people of Multnomah County, rather.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that would be to use that budget to hire people who will, prosecute the crimes that are actually hurting people, which is mostly the police violence in this town.
Right. Yeah. Cops to me are the most violent people in this country. They kill 3 people a day and are responsible for 1/3 of all stranger murders in this country. And more than 40% admit to abusing their spouses or their partners. And Portland is clearly no different. And, it's funny. I mean, the way that you talked about it was similar to how I have when a cop is found to have behaved in a corrupt manner, far extending, the power that is granted to them legally or rightfully. People always ask me, well, don't you want them to be punished? Don't you want them to go to prison? Like, ACAB, and all, and FTP. And I'm always like, similarly to how you worded it, like, I would love it if there was no punitive response. I would love it if there was no carceral punishment. I would love it if we didn't put people in prison where there's no way of being rehabilitated, and there's no reentry services that are effective enough. However, that all exists. And as long as it exists and we're using it to destroy the lives of Black and brown and poor people who aren't cops, it should be applied equally to the cops. And they're the ones committing crimes that are with, they're given this extra authority, extra power. They're given guns. They're told they're, above the law, and then they behave as if they're the opposite. They have, they behave because the way they do, because they know they'll get away with it, with qualified immunity and everything else. They act with impunity, and then people who steal a loaf of bread to feed their family, end up incarcerated, or, and then you see 75% of people in jail are legally innocent. So I certainly agree with you. And as long as this system exists, cops should be treated with by the same token, with the same rules. What are some other?
I think there's a wink here between us that maybe isn't going to be apparent to every one of your viewers who hasn't, studied prison systems, which honestly I hadn't very well until recently either. If everybody were treated equally under the law, the system we have could not exist. Asking for it to be applied equally is asking for it to be abolished. It's just a more politically politic way of saying that. So
correct. And those who know me know exactly where I stand. And also, my unwillingness to change my language, because I personally think that the more aggressive and scary I am, the more likely they may listen to someone who's only using the words defund, but yeah, totally. And in addition to that, like what could Mike in that office do in terms of, not just holding cops responsible, but changing the things that are being tried in court, like, or changing actual laws. As an attorney, this is the kind of knowledge that you have that most don't. Like, what laws could be changed that would actually kind of make it so that fewer people would be arrested for minor things, and fewer people would be in court spending tons of money, or, stuck with a public defender who has way too many cases?
Yeah. Yes. One of the reasons I reached out to Mike when he was running is I do a lot of public records work. And in Oregon, he has an unusual role in that he is the administrative appeal. So if a public body, a local public body like the city, denies me records that I'm entitled to, my first recourse is to send an email to one of his deputies and say, I was denied this. Please issue an order to the city requiring them to give it to me. If I get that order, then the city has a choice to either give it to me, sue me, or if they don't do either of those things and I sue them, I get my attorney's fees, win or lose. So it's quite a powerful hammer to make, to protect transparency. He also is sitting on a trove of really interesting documents. In that office, he has all the files and all the email histories that, I assume, because it's a prosecutor's office, contain just untold amounts of corruption and, falsification of evidence and Brady violations and things that could get people free. So the two things he could do with sort of prosecuting: one, he could open up his records. He could say, the district attorney is going to have a policy that we're going to open up all the case files for everybody, every closed case, and just scan them and put them online and let defense attorneys look through them to get people out who were wrongly convicted. He could just do that. And that would do an amazing amount of good to decrease the prison populations in the state. He could open up files that would include disciplinary records of cops. He could decide that it's in the public interest for us to see how the cops are or aren't being punished internally, and they're not, so that we can hold our politicians accountable, or try to, for allowing that to continue. Right now in Oregon, it's one of the few states where cop discipline is complete secret. It also would help to prevent this, it's the same shit the Catholic Church did. Cops move from, they retire, get a pension, and then move to a new district where they don't, they aren't known to have been a murderer or a rapist, or, some have committed some horrible crime in uniform. So he could do a lot to both open up his own office's records, and then as the point of appeal, demand transparency from the other public bodies in the area. And I just think, shining some sunlight on the way all this corruption happens would do an amazing amount of good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've focused on a little bit recently too, is this wandering cop phenomenon. And it's amazing to me. They don't even go far. Like, they might go from one town to the next town over. Like, they're not even trying to hide it. These are people who've killed people on the job. And the organization that I co-founded, 10 Demands, it's one of the things that, we call for is full transparency and accountability on the road to abolition, meaning that, there are independent investigations and 100% public databases of all of this stuff, so that, we truly could hold people accountable. And, a lot of the parts of the 10 Demands can be implemented at a federal level, but a lot of it is suggestions to organizers in cities who want to push changes at their city council level. And this is a perfect example of, like, proving the efficacy of the alternatives to this carceral system. There's certainly, like, the first departments that should be dismantled are the ones that are found to not only have cops who commit crimes, but leadership that enables them, that knows about it and hides it. And the only way to know that would be for that to be public at this point. And it would really be, it's just, he seems to be put in this place where the public deserves this. I think he knows the public deserves it, but he's thinking, how am I ever going to work with these same cops when I need them, when a civilian commits some crime, if they all hate me now because I've done this? It's a tough position to be in, I guess. Which just makes, just reminds me of, like, the DA is a weird position. Like, who would want to be a DA with the politics? I mean, certainly no one would ever elect me to that position, your politics can't be as far left as probably mine or yours, and left to me is the wrong word, because it's humanist. Like, it's more like, if you care about the people more than you care about the badges, you care about Black lives more than blue.
I don't know. I think Krasner was,
he's done it, right?
He's a defense attorney, right? Like, he doesn't believe in incarceration. And he agreed to do harm reduction. He agreed to take over that role and jump on basically grenade and use his body to protect us from it, right? Like, and that's what I thought Mike Schmidt was doing. What he still has a chance to do.
How much longer does he have to be the Larry?
3 years.
Okay.
He got to start his term early, so he was a little bit more than 3 years. He got to. He
was supposed to.
Underhill just bailed.
And
the governor appointed him. I mean, he didn't have to accept, but it was the right thing to do. He, didn't give him the months maybe he wanted to formulate his plan.
I know that.
But he should have just fucking fired everybody, right? He should have just fired, and he still should be firing people, because he has people who are not living up to what I'm sure his values are. He's been threatened, and that sucks. And I have young kids, and I've been threatened, and that sucks. But he signed up for this shit, right? And somebody would do it. There is somebody else who would do it. I don't think I could get elected. I would do it. I would take that job. And yeah, the cops are going to threaten you and they might kill you. And if you take that job, you need to be a fucking hero. And
Yeah.
you know, you need to just do your job.
Yeah.
If Mike Schmidt, I've talked about this with my friends, if Mike Schmidt would reach out to me and say, hey, I've gotten threats, I need protection, I could have hundreds of people in block at his house every night to protect him from the fash. Seriously, we could have black bloc out there to protect him from the cops if he wanted to be brave.
Well, that's,
I've had that. I've had security block protecting my house, and it was a fantastic feeling to have people who I knew cared about me and I knew had skills to protect me when, you know, some bad stuff was happening.
well, that is an awesome, that's an awesome, I don't know what the word would be, but I hope Mike watches this and hears you and gives you a call, because I do think that Portland has the potential to just be an incredible symbol, like Seattle, you know, possibly like Austin. Like there are certain places in this country that have an opportunity to demonstrate what I'm arguing, the positive benefit, the benefits of changing, of really dismantling this institution, you know, that targets certain communities and destroys certain communities, when so much of the money that goes to policing and prosecution and incarceration could go to building up these communities. And you know, and I think you're right. When you are an elected official, when you take on this role, especially in a place like Portland, where the far right is also very prominent, you know, you're taking that risk, and if you can get that protection, you can go down in history. There is great potential there.
Yeah, we protect us, and that's the whole point.
I love that.
If he becomes us, we'll protect him.
I love that. So speaking of, before we, you know, close out with you just telling my audience more about the kind of work that you do, and why it, you know, why it's where you focus and why it's important. Any thoughts on the strength, or, you know, change in strength of the Proud Boys and you know, the Patriot Prayer and these other far right groups that to some degree are based in Portland, and to another degree love to come to Portland and pick fights?
Yeah, I mean, are you talking about the Wheeler basically inviting them to come beat us up? He
What it
wants
looks
to
like. Yeah.
make it hurt a little, I think was his quote.
Did he
Yeah.
really say that?
Yeah, what was it? He said that, you know, if you see people in black bloc,
Oh yeah.
take
What?
pictures of their license plates and report it to 911. And you know, we need to make it not safe for, you know, them to protest. We need to make it hurt a little.
If you're wearing black clothing, like when I tweeted that out, like that should have gotten, I mean, mine and everyone else's who shared that, it should have gotten a million. I mean, literally, like you're supposed to now spy on your neighbor and call the cops on someone for the color of clothing they have. That's the most fascist thing I'd ever heard. By the way, my cat says hi.
Hello, cat.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I mean, right. So that of course was essentially not a call to your average citizen. That was a call, you think, to those who
No,
are,
and then there were several vehicle attacks that happened right after. There was, you know, that emboldened the fash to come down here and hurt us, and they did. Yeah, I mean, Wheeler has made it clear that that's the side that he's on, and that fascists are welcome here.
And do you see the response by prosecutors to those individuals as
What
similar?
response?
No.
What response?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alan Swinney finally got charged. There was that, who's that dude who was the police trainer who had a whole bunch of bombs?
Oh.
Yeah, he was the Portland police hire him. He's like a one of those kill 'em all sort of police trainers.
Yep.
And he was on some sort of a mission. I think he was trying to do like a false flag and plant IEDs and blame them on the anarchists. And he got caught and it got filmed. And everybody knows that, he had a bunch of bombs and somebody chased him with a camera and like followed him to his car. And we know who it is. I don't think that Mike's prosecuted him. The
Meanwhile,
response is not the same.
okay, yeah, just confirming, because meanwhile, my friend Beta, who's like left Twitter, like left the movement, just trying to like live his best life as someone who's spent, over a year now on house arrest, can't leave to do anything but work.
He is one of the kindest, sweetest human beings I've ever encountered. And he's a big guy and strong.
What's
and
that?
he's a big guy and strong, and he was standing and defending a bunch of people from a bunch of fascists on a bus. I think he might have disarmed one of them.
He did.
And there's a video that Andy No published that was from an angle that made him look like he was an aggressor. I watched the whole video and it's clear he's not.
Yep.
And he's being held in purgatory with bad felony charges that are just being dragged out.
And it's looking like he could, spend the next 4 decades in prison or something, for basically standing up for an old guy who was about to get hit over the head with a hammer, taking that hammer and throwing it back into the bus full of Nazis.
Yeah.
If Mike's going to prosecute, as we said, if Mike's going to prosecute Beta like that, he should be prosecuting the guy who's planting bombs, don't you think?
I mean, let's not even make those equal, right? Like, prosecute somebody for acting in community defense.
Right.
Mike should not prosecute Beta. He should drop that fucking charge, and he has no excuse not to do it yesterday.
Yeah. Well, as I said to Beta, I've known Mike for 20 years, and it's very hard. It's all relative. Like, what I'm experiencing is nothing compared to what Mike is or what Beta is. But it's hard to be in my position, always knowing my politics were certainly left of Mike's, but also knowing he's a good-hearted guy and watching his growth in this field, looking out for the people who have been disfranchised, taking this scary position that, I never trust a DA, and hoping he would change my mind. Telling him about Beta and knowing that my telling him isn't going to convince him. He does his job and I can't tell him what to do, but I can only do what you're doing right now, just urge him to do the right thing. And
there's just no excuse. Yeah, there's no excuse. He has caused a good person a whole lot of agony. The difference between Beta and Mike is Mike chose his, and Mike is doing the harm to Beta. He didn't start it, but he's the only one who's going to end it, and he's the one who's perpetuating it. It's his fault. He needs to own it and stop it.
Yeah. Mike, I believe, inherited that case, but as the owner of the case now has the chance to put it to rest.
Yeah.
All right.
He does not need to defer to his subordinate.
Yeah.
He needs to fucking take control and free a good man.
Yeah. Word. Let's close out with some background on you. We started with a little bit about you just from, my paraphrasing how you kind of describe your work. But if you want, whether the people are in Portland or not, tell me more about what you do and kind of how you ended up focusing in this area and why.
I did corporate patent and trademark law for a long time at a law school. It was intellectually interesting, and it felt kind of amoral. It feels less amoral the longer I got into it and the more I thought about it. But it was, it was interesting work for a while. Then I got to Portland again and I started biking around with my kid. and realizing that our infrastructure sucks, even here in Portland, where it's vaunted. So I got involved in neighborhood politics and tried to advocate for better infrastructure. And then I got there and I realized that the neighborhood associations in this town are white supremacy. That's where it happens. It happens in these little meetings where somebody generally supports all of the good things, but not in this instance, over and over and over, forever. That's how it perpetuates. So I started to fight that. There was a historical landmarks commissioner who got appointed by the last mayor, Mayor Hales, who was she lived in this fancy Victorian mansion across from a parking lot. And as part of her neighborhood association had fought development on that parking lot across the street from her house for years. Then she gets appointed to historic landmarks. Then there's an affordable housing project, 163 units for people AMI 60% or less. And she didn't recuse herself and instead started asking, well, couldn't it be shorter? And where else are the people gonna park? And all of like this, I live across, her house was literally in the shadow study that the developer brought. So I took that to the ethics commission for the state. And it turns out that they're useless. So they threw in the trash can. And she did it again the next month. And I filed again, they threw in the trash can. So I sued them because, I had some skills and thought I'd use them. And I won. And judge ordered the ethics commission to investigate it. They still did a shit job, but it didn't matter because she faced enough scrutiny that she quit. So I was happy I got a little bit of money out of it. And then out of that, I had filed some public records requests. And it turns out that Portland is one of the most opaque public bodies around because now I know, because we have this culture of hiding police records that have spilled over into the civil side. But I was just incensed by how difficult it was to get these records I was entitled to. So I fought and fought and fought, and then I sued, and then I won. So that was all kind of came to a head in November 2019. It was great. I was feeling better. I'd been in a lot of therapy, feeling good about myself. So I quit my job and I hung a shingle. I was going to do sort of civil public records work. And then a plague happened. And then George Floyd was murdered and the whole world changed. And suddenly these skills of kind of looking into opaque government became really relevant. When the police showed up and they didn't have their badges anymore, they didn't have their name tags anymore. And I filed records requests and they wouldn't give it to me. There's nothing that gets my attention more than somebody saying I can't have something that I'm, especially something I'm supposed to have. So that's a fight I'm down for. It just kept falling down that rabbit hole and found myself in the position of filing dozens of tort claim notices against cop violence and filing lawsuits against police and against cities and again, so I'm all in it. I'm doing mostly public transparency and police violence litigation.
That's really cool. So my advice to you, one is to hire me to write your bio and build a website for you. More importantly, the website you do have, update it. So because I I knew by the things that you and I talk about privately, what it seemed like to me you were focused on. I'm glad to hear that it is really your professional focus, as well as kind of you're a good guy who cares about the right stuff and you can't help it. So that's also your non-professional focus. I love you for it. But I think I misdescribed you in the beginning because what you focused on maybe a year or two ago was a little different. They're related. A lot of it has to do with access to information and you suing for things that you shouldn't have to sue for.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my little side note on what you need to do. But also,
I'm on a fun case right now with the ACLU defending the Central Oregon Peacekeepers. They were the folks who stood in front of that ICE bus. And they're having similar problems with the city of Bend. So yeah, kind of expanding that fight.
I love it. Thank you so much for your work. It's so important. I think people used to tell me I should have been a lawyer when I was a kid, maybe in a next life I will be. I really appreciate the work that people like you do, and you're not the first and you won't be the last lawyer I have on this show. I think it's really important. So thank you so much for everything, and stay in touch.
Thank you for
Right?
chatting. This was
Yeah,
fun.
man.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it.
Consider.
You will.
Are we, can we talk for a second?
Yeah.